Today's a special day, not for just this ship, but for our nation and for the world, as we pause to remember what occurred 76 years ago today. Historians refer to such a day as a pivot point or a turning point in history. Every generation has these seminal moments when we can recall that exact time with certain clarity, when we heard the news that would forever change our lives and in many ways the history of the world. For my parents and grandparents, December 7th, 1941 was that day. So if you indulge me just for a few minutes, let me explain how. In 1941, both of my dad's parents were civilian employees at what was then known as McClellan Army Airfield just outside Sacramento. I would say suburban Sacramento, but at that time it was rural Sacramento. McClellan fan. Thank you, Captain Dave. On that day, that Sunday, December 7th, my grandmother had just gone to morning mass, as she did every Sunday for her entire life. But my dad, who was only 11 years old at the time, stayed home because he wasn't feeling well. My dad was listening to the radio. There was no TV. That was how you entertained yourself. And he heard the news of the attack in Pearl Harbor. My grandmother arrived home from church, and my dad told her the news. She called her boss called the base commander, and the base went on alert. A few weeks later, my grandfather, who had served in the Navy when he was a younger man, wanted to re-enlist in the Navy, but he was denied. He was denied not because of his age, he was 39. He was not denied re-entry because of his health, he was in excellent health. He was denied re-entry into the Navy because the War Department said he had a more important job. He was working on a project called radio detection and ranging. My grandfather was one of the first radar technicians in the world. And his efforts were needed for the war there in Sacramento and not in the Navy. I share this little personal story with you now because over the next hour or so, you'll have the opportunity to read. You may have had the opportunity to read about history, but now you'll be able to hear and experience history by hearing the stories and experiences from those who actually lived the history and made the history. These people behind me and in front of me here are part of what we refer to, and rightfully so, as the greatest generation. These are the people who dedicated themselves, made the commitment and sacrifice to nothing they could ever imagine before. And it's because of this commitment, this sacrifice, and this dedication that we're able to sit here today and remember this day. So at the end of today's presentation, I encourage all the students here to come forward, to meet these people, get a selfie with them, and say thank you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce a colleague and a friend I've known for many years, who's going to be the MCs for today's event, the voice of KCBS News Radio, my good friend Stan Bunger. Stan.
Thank you, Mike. And it's really humbling, to be honest with you, to be asked to be part of an event like this. First of all, Yamada-san, thank you for your comments. And I don't know how profoundly those of you in the back, the younger people, received words like that from a representative of the Japanese government. But those in the front might have thought at some time they would never hear that sort of thing. So it's powerful. And for each of you to have heard that, you younger Americans, it's a very profound and important thing. You know, there are events in this nation's history and world history that become touchstones. And we're very fortunate to have gathered on an anniversary of one of those events here to hear from people who were there, to share story, as some people would say, and to be able to compare those stories later. It's not just reading it in a history book, it's just not a date, it's a thing that lives on in the stories you'll hear from those who are here on the stage with me. As Mike indicated, I make my living telling stories on the radio, and as Mike mentioned, that's how the world first learned about what happened at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. I might point out that the world still often first learns about things that way today. 93% of Americans listen to the radio every week. It remains the medium with the most reach of all the media in America, including television and even the internet. So let's take you back to the morning of December 7th, 1941, when America and the world first heard those words over the radio. This is exactly what it sounded like.
declaration of war against Japan. And here are a few late bulletins. The United States Army issued an official statement this morning in Honolulu declaring enemy aircraft have been shot down. There was no description of the number of planes or their location. Governor Joseph B. Poindexter declared a state of emergency existed throughout the Hawaiian Islands. White House Secretary Steve Early said that the President was assembling all information as quickly as possible and will present it to Congress in an informative report, probably in the form of a message to a joint session. The attack was launched at the very moment Japanese peace envoys in Washington sought to continue peace conversations with this country.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you tonight at a very serious moment in our history. The Cabinet is convening and the leaders in Congress are meeting with the President. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the President all afternoon. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking to the President at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and the Philippines and sinking one of our transports loaded with lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be ready for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action. For months now, the knowledge that something of this kind might happen has been hanging over our heads, and yet it seemed impossible to believe, impossible to drop the everyday things of life and feel that there was only one thing which was important: preparation to meet an enemy, no matter where he...
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, NBC. Hello, NBC. This is KTU in Honolulu, Hawaii. I am speaking from the roof of the Advertiser Publishing Company building. We have witnessed this morning the distant view, a brief battle off Pearl Harbor, and a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. The city of Honolulu has also been attacked and considerable damage done. This battle has been going on for nearly 3 hours. One of the bombs dropped within 50 feet of KTU Tower.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.